Hello there, people of the internet. Public gun range, you guys are probably going to hear some gunfire in the background. Nothing I can do about that. It's also a little windy today. You're probably going to hear some wind noise. Again, nothing I can do about that. I was asked to go into talking about making your own rifle brass. And there's a couple of ways that you can do it, but I'm going to talk about like the two main easiest ways to make your own rifle brass. I can't actually show you guys because YouTube has policies against showing the manufacturer of ammunition. That's why I can't show reloading videos either. There are people out there that do show it, but if YouTube catches on to them, they're gonna get in trouble. So since my stuff is monetized and since YouTube regularly reviews my channel, I'm not gonna bite the I'm gonna bite the bullet and just not show you guys, and instead of doing that, I will just talk about it. This right here is 7.7 Jap, and this is a really good example of a relatively rare cartridge that you would definitely benefit from by making your own brass from. So 7.7 Jap is actually extremely similar in terms of base case dimensions to 30-06. It might even be identical. I'm not entirely positive about that. So rather than say identical, I'm just going to say extremely similar. Now, why that comes in handy is because you can use 30-06 brass to make 7.7 Jap brass. If you get yourself, say, let's call it a full-length sizing die, and you get yourself a 30-06 brass case. I think it's a 7.62 by 63 millimeter. You got to get that down to 57 millimeter. First thing that I do whenever I do this process is I lube the hell out of the case. You're going to want that like nice and well greased. I use Crisco. It's a really, really good ammunition lubricant so you don't get your brass stuck inside of your dies. But you close that like, let's say this right here is the die. You close that 30-06 brass into your 7.7 Jap sizing die, and it will actually like press that 30-06 brass into a 7.7 Jap sizing die, and then you trim off the excess brass, or you could trim it first. Like, it just depends on your particular the way it is that you want to do it. You got to get 5 millimeters off of that. I think it's 5, might be 6 millimeters. You got to get 6 millimeters off of that brass whenever you trim it up. And you just throw it inside the sizing die, and the sizing die like pushes that brass into the size it needs to be. It's supposed to be sizing like a 7.7 Jap round that has expanded from firing. Every time you fire, your brass expands a little bit. And if your brass has stretched and expanded a little bit more than what your rifle chamber is calling for, then you might have some difficulty seating that brass. But it like the sizing die is supposed to press that brass down to its original specs. So if you were to stick a different kind of brass in there that was dimensionally at the base very similar to that brass, then you could mold that brass into the kind of brass that you're looking for. Does that make sense? If you use annealed brass, which tends to be significantly softer than non-annealed brass, it is definitely easier to do. And if you want to anneal your own brass, which you can do just by taking like a torch and heating up your brass to the point of to where it gets discolored almost, like that's a really, really, really layman's way of saying how to anneal your brass. Do more research on it. We're not here to discuss that. But that's a really, really good way to be able to get a relatively rare cartridge from a relatively common cartridge. People make their own 7.7 Jap brass on a 30-06 all the time just by shoving it through a sizing die and trimming it. Get yourself a set of calipers and get yourself some sort of trimming device that you would use. I've seen all sorts of trimming devices out there. Yeah, I mean, I've gone as far as using a bench grinder to trim my brass, as long as you use a little hand file to clean it up and whatnot. Not something I'd want to use for mass production, but it would work as long as your measurements are proper. So that is one way to make your own brass. You size it using brass that is already extremely similar in some aspects to the brass that you're wanting. In this particular case, 7.7 Jap from 30-06, just because the base dimensions are extremely similar, so you could, in theory, run 30-06 in a 7.7 Jap rifle. Like if you were to rechamber that rifle from 7.7 to 30-06, you'd run that on the same bolt just because of the case dimensions. Does that make sense? I'm trying to keep things nice and simple for people who don't necessarily understand firearms all that much. This way they might be able to comprehend things a little bit better. So hopefully that is like the very simplistic layman's terms of how you might understand how to make your own brass from something else. Figure out a cartridge, preferably one that you could actually get brass for, that is similar in base size, and by base I mean like the head of the cartridge size, to the brass case that you're wanting, and then get yourself a sizing die for the brass case that you're wanting, and then just force those bastards through there and trim them up to the right size, and there you go, you got yourself an appropriately sized cartridge. Now on top of that, there is also another way to make your own brass from other much more common brass cases. Like, I have a Steyr 8x50. I'm sure a lot of people already know where I'm going with this. I have a Steyr 8x50, and that 8x50 cartridge is dimensionally exactly the same as 7.62x54 rimmed, minus the diameter of the bullet. We have an 8mm bullet and a 7.62mm bullet. So you can fire 7.62x54R through your 8x50 Steyr rifles. However, your bullet's going to keyhole because it's not the right size bullet. It is significantly smaller, and you're not going to get nearly as much pressure inside of that firearm just because you're not getting that gas seal. But the brass, upon firing, is going to expand the chamber of that firearm, and that is called fire-forming brass. A lot of times people will fire-form brass to make some other kind of brass, and whenever you fire-form brass, I definitely recommend that you utilize something that is a little bit less powered than the full powered cartridge, assuming that we're talking about full powered cartridges. Like in an 8890, if you were to want to fire form brass in that, I don't necessarily know if I would trust shooting 7.62x54R in that, just because the pressures generated might be a little much for that. That's a black powder design. You're firing full powered smokeless powder through it. Like, that's just not something that I would personally trust. I would definitely like undercharge that. You're still going to get that expansion of brass. It does not take a lot of pressure to expand brass, and you'll fire form your brass to where you can get like go out and get 7.62x54 rimmed brass for significantly less money than something like 8x50 Steyr brass. So I got this 7.7 Jap. This is actually PPU 7.7 by, yeah, this says 7.7 by 58. I thought it was 7.7 by 57. Perhaps I was wrong on that. 7.7 by 58. Japanese. So this is a hand load. I've already shot this brass. This is, I don't know, fired 5 times at this point brass. I actually have ammunition for my .303 British rifle, like projectiles, loaded into this. It's 174 grain projectiles. They are a 310 diameter bullet, and I have them undercharged by about 10% to help prolong the life of the brass. As you shoot it and brass expands, that brass just expands and expands and expands and expands, and eventually gets to the point to where the brass is going to like fracture and crack and things like that, and you'll have to discard that brass case and go out and get yourself some more. So to prolong the life of brass, I just undercharge mine a little bit, and it helps get a little bit more life out of the brass because I get less expansion and thus less stretching. So let me send a round at our target there. Aha! I hit the steel target and it went away. This is a really accurate rifle. This is the Japanese last ditch rifle, and I've made videos on this. They should be up by now. But this is a surprisingly accurate rifle for what it is that we're dealing with here. I am actually significantly pleased with it. So that's my 2 cents on the manufacturing of your own brass. There's definitely much more complicated ways out there of doing it. Like, you could get yourself a milling lathe machine and like make your own brass, but I would definitely recommend just like fire forming or using a sizing die or something like that on already existing brass that you can already get your hands on. Just figuring out the size of the brass that you're looking for. Ask around, Google search it, do whatever it is you got to do to figure out the size of the brass that you're looking for to get the size of the brass that you actually need. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. That's all I have to say about it. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I will see you guys on the next episode.
while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.